a day has passed since Kell Brook's one-sided beatdown of Amir, and naturally people are asking the question, what's next for Kell Brook? There seem to be three main avenues that Kell Brook can explore. The first one being retirement, the second one being a fight against Benn, and the third one being a fight against Chris Eubank Jr. And now I'm just going to take this chance to kind of go through each of these options and give my take on them. So the first one, a prospective Benn fight. People have asked me since I did my post-fight video of Khan versus Brook what I think of this fight. And I think it's a good fight. I think it's one that I'd certainly like to see. I do believe that it'd be an entertaining build-up, an entertaining fight in itself. The only kind of prerequisite, I guess you could say, that I'd like to see is that Benn maybe has one, maybe two fights before he has a fight with Kell Brook. Just because Benn has been stringing together some good form, but against no one of the level of Kell Brook. And now Kell Brook's not at his best. I think even though his dominant display against Amir Khan showed that he still has something left, it certainly wasn't a vintage Kell Brook performance. I do believe that Kell Brook is on his way out. He's in the latter stage of his career. But Benn, I feel maybe it's just a little bit green. He certainly has a chance of beating Kell Brook, but I think if you're looking at it from the standpoint of Benn having the best chance, or a more considerable size chance, maybe just have another couple of fights. I believe he's supposed to fight Chris Van Heerden next. Chris Van Heerden's a decent fighter. He's no world beater, but he's big, pretty strong. He's experienced. He's been in against the likes of Errol Spence. So it's going to be another gauge of where is Benn right now. But see, with Benn, he hasn't really had a tough fight since the Cedric Payno fight. So I do feel that maybe ask some questions, because it's always going to be easier to look good against guys who don't really bring much to the table. Like in his last fight, he fought Chris Algieri, and now on his day, Chris Algieri was a good fighter, but he was way past it. He'd been inactive in spots in recent years, and it's just that kind of fight doesn't necessarily prepare you too well for a Kell Brook fight. Before that, he fought Granados, another decent name, but the way Granados fought didn't really ask many questions of Benn. He didn't really break a sweat. Yeah, it was kind of frustrating because Granados was so negative, but I think more than anything that develops patience. It's difficult to get a lot out of that kind of fight when someone's so negative. So yeah, I'd like to see Benn at least one more fight before he goes in with a Kell Brook, just because he is kind of small for the weight. Kell Brook is on the other end of the spectrum. He's big for the weight, and he's experienced, and he's obviously going to be on a bit of a high now, because even though he was going into this Khan fight coming off the back of a loss, he's now kind of probably got a bit more of a confidence boost, because he's had this long running rivalry with Khan, and there was a lot of pressure on this fight. Yeah, there was no title, and there was no neither of them were undefeated. They weren't about to lose their undefeated record, but there was bragging rights, and there was a lot of pride at stake. And those fights can be just as stressful, especially when it's kind of a semi-local derby, King of the North, that kind of thing. And Kell Brook was putting a lot of pressure on himself. He said, if I lose this fight, I'm going to have to walk with my head down for the rest of my life. And he put that on himself, but he came through, and it's bound to give him a confidence boost and make him feel like he's got his mojo back after a rough couple of years. So that's my thought on the Benn, or prospective Benn fight. The next one being a prospective fight with Chris Eubank Jr. Now, personally, I think I touched on this in my post-fight video. I think this is a silly fight. I think any fight north of 154 pounds for Kell Brook is silly. He's been up to middleweight once before, albeit against Gennady Golovkin, who many people would agree is several leagues above even Chris Eubank Jr. I think it's just not worth it. It really depends what Kell Brook wants from that kind of fight. But also, when you look at it from the perspective of Chris Eubank Jr., it's silly for him, because yeah, they have beef, quote unquote, but Chris Eubank Jr. has just beaten Liam Williams, who, yeah, spent some of his career at light middleweight. He moved up to middleweight and was a pretty decent middleweight. Proved that he could at least hang with world champions, at least a world champion in Demetrius Andrade. So for Chris Eubank Jr. to then fight Kell Brook, if he won that fight, which I'd expect him to do so, it's like, okay, what do you really gain from that? What do you really want from that? But from the perspective of Kell Brook, I think it really depends on how much money would a Chris Eubank Jr. fight generate for him, because stylistically, I don't think that fight is a very clever one for Kell Brook to take. Now, if Kell Brook was, say, a natural middleweight and had the size of a natural middleweight in terms of stature and reach, I'd say that'd be a much more interesting fight, because he has the kind of style that potentially could trouble Eubank Jr., because Eubank Jr. is very underdeveloped at long range. He doesn't really like long range boxers, and it's not difficult to tie him in knots, for lack of a better term. He doesn't deal with that kind of style. However, Kell Brook does have certain flaws, like we saw in the Amir Khan fight. Even though it was so one-sided, we see some of the defensive limitations of Kell Brook. He can be overwhelmed by someone who's quick and knows how to string their punches together, because he is a little bit defensively lazy sometimes. And so if you then factor that in with Chris Eubank Jr., who can string together his punches, and he's not the biggest puncher, but he can certainly overwhelm you. And he's going to be... well, it's difficult, because Chris Eubank Jr. is naturally bigger than Kell Brook, but Kell Brook's not a small man, because Kell Brook's like 5'9", Chris Eubank's 5'11". But Kell Brook, he's more compact. He's quite a densely built guy. If you look at his physique, he's quite heavy. He was someone in the lead up to the Golovkin fight. It seemed to be his natural weight, and he was touching 180 pounds almost. So he's not a small man, but he's obviously smaller than Chris Eubank Jr. because he's been fighting at welterweight for his career, or the vast majority of it. And so, yeah, that just doesn't seem like a smart fight for me. So unless it's a real money spinner and he really fancies his chances off the back of this Khan fight, yeah, I think that's a silly fight for him. There are maybe, just to touch on other fights at 147, he's already fought Spence, he's already fought Crawford, and he lost to both of them. Who else could he fight? Jerron Ennis? What does Ennis bring to the table? Ennis, I don't think many people are going to be too keen to fight him. Yeah, it's because that's the thing. Welterweight is a steep division. Maybe he could fight Thurman, but how much money does that draw? It'd probably have to be stateside if they hope to do any decent numbers or generate revenue. There couldn't be a title on the line. Does he hope to maybe slip in between Ugas and Spence and fight Ugas? Who knows? But I think if he is going to carry on, he should keep his eyes on welterweight. Maybe some select fights at 154 pounds. I can't remember who it was. I think it might have been Dalmas. Correct me if I'm wrong, but he asked me, or whoever it was asked me what I think of his interest in fights at 154. I think 154 is going to be even tougher than 147. And I think if he's going to go for a 154 pound fight, it should be against Liam Smith. And now I know that doesn't seem like much at first, but they have sparred before, so there's going to be some familiarity, which can potentially make for an entertaining fight. But also, it will be a good kind of domestic fight, even though I don't think there's really a rivalry between these two, but they're from a similar area. Kell Brook being from Sheffield, Liam Smith being from Liverpool, so it's another north of England kind of matchup. But also, I feel like out of the top 10 at light middleweight, that is probably his best or the most winnable fight for him, for Kell Brook. So if he insists, I'd say Liam Smith. I feel like that one makes the most sense. So yeah, just to touch on some other options. Finally is retirement, just calling it a day. And in my humble opinion, I just make little shit videos on my little shit YouTube channel. I think that's the best bet for Kell Brook. I think that is probably the smartest option. He's been around a long time. Many people don't know, but Kell Brook's been a pro since 2004. So, what, the best part of 18 years. And I do believe that Kell Brook to some degree has underachieved. I do believe that he could have done more in his career, but there were poor decisions being made, as well as him being around in a tough era, especially of welterweights as we see right now. Kind of makes it difficult for him to break through. But he's been a good addition over the years. He's won a world title. He's fought 3 of the best fighters in boxing, in Golovkin, in Spence, and Terence Crawford. 2 of those guys in Golovkin and Crawford being, top 5 pound for pound guys. So, and yeah, he lost both those fights and he lost them convincingly, but he didn't disgrace himself. He did what he could. And so Kell Brook's always been a go-getter for the most part. And I look at his performance against Khan, I don't think like there's much left. Not to say that he's completely shot, but I don't think he can really achieve any more big things. I feel like this was his last hurrah. So personally, I'd like to see him call it a day. But then, who am I? It's his career. He can do what he wants. But if you were to ask me, what would I like to see from Kell Brook next? I'd say retirement. I don't think there's anything else to see. And the same goes for Amir Khan. And now this is obviously a video about about Kell Brook, but I just want to say with Amir Khan, he's someone who, for as long as I can remember, Amir Khan has always been under such criticism. And look, I'm not going to try and talk rubbish and say that it's unfair criticism, because a lot of it is warranted. But Amir Khan, he has had a hard time, and this is someone who, for years, has had to just absorb the criticism of being weak, being fragile, being vulnerable, having no chin. That's just in the sphere of boxing. There are even more insults, to be fair. A lot of that he's had to deal with in his entire life, Amir Khan. Outside boxing, inside boxing. But from a purely boxing perspective, this is someone who has, as we know, has been knocked out several times, and he's always picked himself up. He's always dusted himself off, and he's had another go. And for the most part, minus the Terence Crawford fight, Amir Khan has always showed immense heart and immense dedication to the sport that we love so much. And he's provided massive amounts of entertainment. From a boxing perspective, he's been quite an inspiration. And he's just been deconstructed in a bitter rival, a bitter grudge match by the man who he hates most. And at the end of it, he still has the humility to say, the better man won. I had a great camp, and I really wanted this fight, but Kell Brook just wanted it more. And so it's quite touching, to see Amir Khan so graceful in defeat. Because yeah, he's a bit of a troll sometimes, but he did just put his hands up and say, look, he just wanted it more. He was better. The better man won. And so I do believe that Amir Khan, despite his flaws and his shortcomings, he deserves respect. He deserves ultimate respect. As far as I've seen, he has announced his retirement, or he's at least hinted at it. So to Amir Khan, I wish him all the best in the case that he does retire. And I do believe that he deserves all of our respect. So yeah, that's just my take on this kind of aftermath of the Amir Khan versus Kell Brook fight. Let me know what you think. What do you think of Kell Brook's options going forward? What do you make of what I've touched on in regards to his options? What do you make of Amir Khan and this seemingly being the last we see of him in a professional boxing ring? Leave it all down below, and I'll get back to you. If you could like, comment, share and subscribe, be greatly appreciated. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you on the next video.